talk about a couple of just short topics. And then we are going to look at web page design and discuss what we think makes a well-designed web page, a well-designed website. So we'll do a couple of the topics first. Let's bring down the example from last time, refresh my memory where we're at, and we'll go from there. Okay. We went through actually several different iterations of style for our Lion pages with different style sheets. Let's just pick one of them. Look at this one, see if that's a good one. Yeah, let's go with this one instead. Yeah, let's go with this one. Good as any. Actually, let's go the original. I don't like that one. We'll spend all class debating which one to cover. Let's go with this one. All right. Couple of things about selectors in CSS. Let's go and edit the CSS file associated with this guy, which is style2. We should know at least, I'm trying to think of what we went over in class. I'm just going to review a couple additional selectors so that you can understand them. All right. One of them is to put a selector that says if a tag is inside another tag. So for example, let's say I made a paragraph, a style rule for a paragraph. And I said font size 0.8 em. 0.8 em means 80% of the normal size. So it means 80% emphasized. That's what the EM stands for. So 1 em would be normal size. Now, with this selector right as it stands, all right, or actually let's do this. Let's make it paragraph 1.2m. All right. That's going to make the paragraphs 120% emphasized. So they're going to be bigger than normal. All right. So let's go and view this page. Well, it makes everything 120% bigger. All right. Or if I make it even bigger still to make it more noticeable, let's make it 1.4m. It will make everything bigger. And I might not want everything bigger. All right? Maybe I only want certain things bigger. So one of the things I can do is, when you're describing what gets a style rule, that's the selector. So right now the selector is a simple P, which says P gets a font size of 1.4m. That means every paragraph on the page. So this paragraph, these paragraphs, all the paragraphs on the page get that emphasized. All right? Now, what if I only want some of the paragraphs bigger? What if I only want these paragraphs bigger? Well, what are those paragraphs? Those are the paragraphs that are in the article. So the paragraphs that are in the article I want bigger. The paragraphs that are not in the article I don't want bigger. So how do I do that? Well, I can do that this way. I can say article space P. So what that says is that means a P tag inside an article gets a style rule. So we're changing the selector. Remember, the selector says that these are the things that get the style rule. So all of these selectors right now are simple and are straightforward. They say that every H1, every H2, every header, every article, every footer. This, however, says every P that is within a paragraph tag. So what P's are within the paragraph tag? This one and this one. So those will be the ones that will be emphasized. And these two paragraphs will be their normal size. Assuming that I save it. So now notice those are the normal size and this paragraph is bigger. Okay? So that's one thing that you can do, is you can give selectors that say not just every tag of a certain type, but only tags within a certain other tag. So you might have links within your navigation look different than links within an article, for example. All right? Question about that. That's an additional selector. Yes?
I can't remember, is article just a name or is it something?
Article's a tag. All right, article is one of the tags that is one of the main HTML5 tags that describe the structure of a page. So that's a different kind of selector, and I'm not sure if we use that or not. In addition to that, we can refine our selectors even more. We can put a class on certain things. For example, these paragraphs here are credits, right? I might want to treat credits a certain way. I might want to, for example, just for fun, I'll put a border around these credits. All right? So anything that's a credit, I want to treat a certain way. Well, the problem is there is no credit tag, right? There is, however, we can assign a class to these tags and say a class of credit. And when we assign a class to it, we can write a style rule for it. Now, when you write a style rule for a class, you start with a period. So I would say period credit, and then I could put in brackets the style. So we'll talk more about borders later on, but just to introduce them to you, border 1 pixel solid black. And again, if I save everything, now those paragraphs have a border around them. You could do it any number of different ways. You could make it a different color. You could make it a different font size, anything that would make it stand out. Why do we do these things? And this is going to sort of dovetail nicely into our discussion about well-designed websites. We style the things a certain way to make them stand out, to give the browser, or to give the viewer of the page a visual cue immediately that there's something different about these paragraphs. These aren't just ordinary paragraphs. We can tell at a glance, we take our glasses off, we can tell at a glance that this is somehow different than this. Why? Because there's different size font, and this has a border around it. That means something. All right, that makes things stand out. All right, so we use style to do that, to sort of give a visual way of highlighting the difference in meaning between different pieces of content on the page. So in other words, these are both paragraphs. This is a paragraph, and this is a paragraph. These two are paragraph, these two are paragraph. But they're different kinds of paragraphs. One is a paragraph that is just a credit that says we got this from such and such website. This is a paragraph that actually has more information about the topic that we're talking about. So in this case, we make this one bigger to make it more prominent. This one we put a border around it to make it stand out and to tell the user that there's something special about these things. There is one last thing that we can do, and it's probably the rarest. And I'll tell you why it's the rarest. Generally, we want to treat everything that's like the same. So all our credits, we want to look the same. All right? So generally speaking, we want all our credits to look the same. So therefore, we can assign our paragraphs that are credits, we can assign them a class. And the class guarantees that they all look the same. Right? Because we can write a style rule for that class and make sure that all the things that have a class of credit get styled a certain way. There is some cases, though, where there is just one thing on the page. It's not a class of things. There's just one thing on the page that we want to stand out somehow differently. All right? And in that case, we can use what's called an ID. An ID only points to one thing on a page, where a class can point to multiple things on a page. That's the chief difference between the two. So I can have two things with a class of credit. That's fine, right? There's more than one person in this class. You know, if you talk about a class of employee, there's more than one employee of that class. So when you talk about class, you're talking about more than one of something. You're talking about a whole category of things. So we can assign a class to more than one thing. We can only assign an ID to one thing. We can only assign a certain ID to one thing. Two different things will have two different IDs. So for example, this paragraph might be a special paragraph. It's sort of the intro, right? So I'm going to give it an ID of intro. Can't have two intros on the page, all right? If we're going to use an ID to define intro. So what we'll do with this is we could go into our style and say pound sign intro, the pound sign indicates that this is a ID. So if it just starts with the name of something, it's a tag. If it starts with a dot, it's a class. If it starts with a pound sign, it's an ID. And I could give a style, maybe to make it bold. Font weight bold. And now our intro paragraph is defined as having a font weight as bold. It's important that you carefully choose these things with the thought of reusability in mind. There's a bunch of ways you could do the same thing, all right? And generally speaking, the simpler you make your CSS, the better. I could, for example, make a class or an ID for everything on the page, but I really don't need to, because I can use the HTML tags for most of the stuff on the page. The few exceptions to where I want to treat them differently, I can do that by either nesting the paragraph, and nesting the style rule like this, or giving a class, or giving an ID. So these are ways that you can change things on the page, but not change everything on the page. All right? So we can have some paragraphs look one way, and some paragraphs look another way. All right? We probably should talk about links. Links have sort of their own styling rules. All right? Remember, if we give a style rule, if we don't give a style rule specifically for the link, you get the browser default. So I can do a style for a link that says A color red. I don't know, we'll make them red. I'll make those links red. If we do one rule for a link, we should do a couple other rules as well. We can do an A visited, because that's a good idea to let people know if they visited that link or not. So I could say maybe a visited, I'm going to make pound sign 770000. What does that represent? That represents a darker shade of red. All right, because remember, in the hex code, these two things represent red. The highest value is FF. So I have a little bit of red, no green, and no blue. So this will be a darker shade of red. So I refresh. It's like that. I go and visit that page, and then come back. It's a darker shade of red. All right? That's a nice visual cue, again, to give your user to let them know that they visited a page. All right? Especially if they've been on your site for a while looking for things, it's often useful for your users to know if they've visited a page on your site or not. All right? That way, if they might want to go back to that page. And which page was that thing on that I found? Well, this shows them which pages they visited. Or the opposite. Gee, I know I didn't find what I was looking for on the pages that I visited, so I want to try another one. Well, that will tell them that. Another thing that we can do is we can do a hover. And we can do this with color. And, no, I don't know. Let's make it yellow. The user hovers over it. So the user goes and hovers over it. It becomes yellow. Now, you don't have to just use color, remember. You could do a bunch of things. You could actually make the font bigger if they hover over it. That makes the font a little bit bigger as well. The user hovers over it. You can actually, by using a lot of different style rules, you can actually make links look like buttons by putting a border on them, by putting a background color, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure we'll see an example of that sometime in this class. There's also an active. And there's a specific order that you put these in. And I never remember what that order is. Link, visited, hover, and active. And I think it's supposed to be in that order. Link, visited, hover, and active. Hover must become after link and visited. Active must come after hover. All right. Last thing I want to do is talk about what if images are in a different folder. All right? Generally speaking, you have what you could call sort of the root of the website. And the root of the website would be the folder that all the links are in, or all the web pages are in. Oftentimes what people will do is they will create a separate folder for images. So let's go and do that now. Let's create a separate folder for images. And I'm going to call it, cleverly enough, images. And I'm going to drag those pictures in them. So all the images are now in the images folder. Now when I do that, my code's not going to work anymore, right? The CSS rule doesn't work before, and notice what we get. We get the alt text for those. Why? Because if we look at this web page, we just said that the image is source equals 1.jpg. Well, if I don't have a directory name prior to it, it's going to assume it's in the same folder. Well, that image is no longer in the same folder. It's in a subfolder called images. So if you have a subfolder called images, you would put that in before it. Couple of things. You will always use a /. Doesn't matter if you're on Windows and you think you're supposed to use a \. You will always use a / for images. For the folder name. So all this is saying is, in the folder where my web page is, there's a subfolder called images, and my image is in this folder called images, and it's called 1.jpg. So let me go and fix this, and let me fix the CSS as well. I'll fix the CSS the same way. So I'm going to go do that with all the CSS files. Name of the folder and /. That's assuming that the folder is in the root where all the web pages are. So I'm going to go and change all these guys. Take a minute here to put that in there. Got rid of images on that one. And that one. And this one, I think. All right. So now everything should work okay on that page. And we can see the images again. I think this one, well, whatever, we'll leave it as it is. Now, you can get all sorts of complicated arrangements. If you have it in a folder, if you have your pages in one folder and your images in another folder, you can use a dot to go up a directory and then the folder name to go down. If any of you have ever been like in the operating systems class where you use a change directory to go up a folder and then down a folder, it's the exact same sort of syntax. All right. If you haven't done that, when you take it, you will study it, and just remember it's the same syntax. If you want to do anything other than just having it in a subfolder called images, then talk to me about it if you're having difficulty with it. But generally speaking, that's really all that you need to do, is you need to say that. Put a folder called images, put the images in there, and then just use a folder name with your web page, assuming that that images is in a subfolder underneath where the pages are. Questions? Yes?
If you want your pictures to be found, like for an image search, how would you do those?
What do you mean found by an image search?
Well, if you did one image, two image, you'll find that it's like Google image search. Say you're an artist and you want your piece to be seen.
Well, you would use the alt attribute. Plus, Google search doesn't base it entirely on the file name now.
So there's no way to do
Well, yeah, there's a way to do that, and I just said, on your page you would put it within a context. For example, these are images about lions. They're on a page about lions. So if Google indexed these, it would assume the images were lions. All right, yes? Plus the alt attribute, by the way, would read that. No. Well, I mean, you have to publish it on the web insofar as you have to put it on a web server that is connected to the internet and that people can access. But Google actually has what's called crawling. It just constantly is looking for pages and files and stuff on the web. Yep. So like, for example, if we did a search for lions and looked at images, well, that has lions in the title. That has lions in the title. Yeah, that doesn't have lions anywhere in there, yet it still found it. It found it. It found it by context. All right. Again, we have learned and we will continue to learn. With the introduction of the bit with the ID, we literally now can make every single thing on the page look different if we wanted to. All right? Clearly that won't necessarily make for a well-designed page. So what I'd like to do now, and this is the focus of your lab assignment, but I would like to discuss it for a little bit, sort of as an introduction to discussing your project. So we'll start discussing your project either the end of class today or the beginning of class on Wednesday. But what makes for a well-designed page and or site? Or if you'd rather, give me an example of either a well-designed or a poorly designed page or site?
Poorly designed.
Sure.
www dot or darkenwood dash or darkenwood.com.
Okay, how do you spell that?
www.
Yeah.
Dot or darkenwood.
Yes.
So it's darken and then dash wood.
DARKEN?
Yeah.
Wood.com. Okay, you can. Okay, you can learn a lot about good web design by looking at bad web design. So let's pull it up here. Actually, it just says site down for maintenance.
Oh, shoot, that's because he's fixing it with other code.
Okay.
I guess we can't do that.
Yeah, I guess we can. Oh, well, no, here we go. Here we go. If I put the www in, sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't do this. My partner only does tax websites and he doesn't do pretty, so
Okay. What don't we like about this?
everything.
Okay. Okay.
I did not check.
So let's start talking in more specific terms. What are some of the things that we don't like about this? I heard a couple of them individually. And what don't we like about the coloring scheme? Okay. All right. So I'm going to write. We can either write these. You know, anytime we talk about a bad website or a good website, we can either write it as a positive or a negative, right? We can either say it's bad to have a color scheme that is difficult to read, or we could say it's good to have a color scheme that's easy to read, right? It's like the bad and the good are just flipping that. So a bad website has a color scheme that's hard to read. What else? Okay. Okay. Images distorted. And we did talk about that in the one class where I talked about when you resize an image to be sure to size it in the same proportion, both vertical and horizontal. What else? I heard the word wordy before. All right. Okay. Okay. Not clearly identified purpose. I would look at that and I would say that it's not necessarily so much that there's a lot of words, is that the font makes them difficult to read. Yeah. Well, how do I want to say this? It would be better if there was a heading that said that this is the site about this, and that there was a blurb that described that. But that's really not that big of a paragraph to read. Okay. All right. Right. What's really bad about the font is all caps. All right. That is really decreases the readability. So the font not readable. Not clearly identified, using headers to identify the site and to also organize the site. Like you mentioned before about promotions. If there was something about promotions, then maybe you would have a header for promotions and have just about the promotions underneath that. That way, if you knew already what the site was about and you were coming here about the promotions or free tickets or whatever, then you could just jump and read the section about promotions. All right. Anything else we care to say? Yeah, the picture is really stretched. The images are just. All right. We're not here to blame anyone.
No, it's cool. That's on, yeah.
All right. They're hard to read in a couple sense. First of all, the blue against the black is hard to read. Secondly, they are spaced so closely together, it's hard really to distinguish what is a link. You know, like for example, about. It sort of blends in with the hours and price, you know, because they're right next to each other until you mouse over it. So they're sort of cramped as well. All right. All right, so let's look to summarize this, because it's it's not just about this site. Our goal isn't to make just this site better, but our goal is to identify sort of what constitutes a good website and do that. So we talked about, first of all, the bad, the negative is to say that the color scheme is hard to read. The good version of that would be legible fonts. Images distorted, of course, no distorted images. We mentioned that the site is not clearly identified and there wasn't headers. I would say the positive for that would be to clearly identify the site of the purpose of the site. Have the content of the page organized in a certain way so that we don't have to read the entire page if there's only one section of information that we want. So if we want to know about the promotions, we can just skip to the promotions part. Font not readable, we mentioned that up there. Links hard to read. Sort of the flip side of that would be a very clear navigation. Clear navigation means a couple of things, all right? It means, first of all, be clear what the navigation is on the page, so that at a glance you know that these are the links and that they're obvious. Be clear in naming your links so that people know what they get when they click on something, all right? And make it clear as in make it easy to read. So when we talk about clear navigation, we really mean all these. And another thing I would say about this is the use of white space. Now, when we say white space, we don't really literally mean the color white. We would describe this as white space, even though the actual color is black. By white space, we mean the space between things. All right? So that's called white space because in the old days, it was, most things were printed on white paper, like magazines and newspapers. So the space between things was literally white space. But we still use the term white space for web pages, even though the web pages can be of multiple colors. All right, excellent. Does anyone else have a good or a bad example? Sure. Oh, this is a classic. And this one gets mentioned every single semester. If this guy ever changes his site to make it good, I'm really going to be sad. All right? Yeah. All right, are you ready? And I'm not even joking. If anyone or anyone watching is prone to seizures, no, I'm totally not joking. You might not want to look because there's animations on this, and it's possible that animations can trigger seizures. All right, and here we go. Oh yeah. Well, what is the website? Let's see if we can figure it out by looking. Yeah. Leader of the pack, Guardian, UK's favorite car leasing company from Newcastle. So they're in the United Kingdom. All right.
I like it.
Actually, this is better. This is better than I've seen it before. They actually trim down stuff from this. Let's scroll down a little bit. All right, here we go.
That should be on our site.
Pardon me?
Someone's actually shopping for cars on this website.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the thing. It's great for us to look at this and say, oh wow, that looks pretty cool. It would be a different thing if you're actually trying to use the site for what it was intended, to try to like find a car to lease, right? Right. I have a feeling he did not ask Coca-Cola permission for that. Just a guess. This almost crosses over. You know, like how like if you watch like some really bad like horror movies or sci-fi movies, they're like so bad that they're fun. All right, this is almost like that. But I would say be very, very careful, because we're just looking at it like, wow, this is kind of neat. He's neat on the motorcycle and so on. We're not actually trying to lease a car from this site. All right. If you tried to do that, then it would be difficult. All right. First of all, really, all of this, as interesting visually as it is, there's really nothing about the main purpose of the site here. In fact, you have to read between the lines to figure out what it's for. There is navigation over here, all right, but you actually have to scroll before you even start seeing the cars, all right? And now we go. And these are very, very, very close together, not much white space, and so on. There's a lot going on here. And look at this navigation over here that goes on endlessly forever. All right. There's a lot to distract you. Again, we can look at this and say this is a cool website, but if you're spending your time laughing about the GIF and not leasing your car, then it might not necessarily be a very successful site. So we're going to talk about, there's that too. What does it say for the credibility of it? But it is sort of a long tradition. I mean, I remember like growing up, the TV ads for the car dealers. A lot of them were really over the top. I think in the past they've sort of gotten, or in the present they've sort of gotten away from that. But it's almost like, gimmicky to stick in your mind and all that. What would we say, and again, let's be fair about this. What would we say is the good aspects of this site? Shock value, I'm going to rephrase that a little bit, because you are right, there is sort of a shock value. I'll put it a little bit different, that it makes an impression. Now, whether in fact that's the impression that you want it to make, or he wants it to make, is another question, right? But it is visually interesting, and it makes an impression, all right? What's the bad about it? Pardon me? All right. No distractions, if we're talking this in good. Stuff should not be crammed together. And that goes back to white space. Endlessly scrolling. Stuff that is on the page that doesn't really serve the purpose of the page. Oh, Coca.
You can have that whole sidebar down below, you know, that like link space. All those are links back there?
Yeah, they're all used for the overhead thing.
I didn't see that.
It's like, oh, I get what you're saying.
Right. Okay. All right. So, these are some guidelines that we're talking about, though. Not crammed together. An appropriate amount of content per page, right? How much is appropriate? Well, that's a good question. All right. I will say that this, again, seems like overkill. The fact that to get to all the stuff that you have to get to, you have to scroll for hours to get to that. You know, if you want a Volkswagen or a Volvo, you have to scroll past a lot of distractions to get to that. All right? And that is not a good thing. If we could think, I have one site in mind that is the exact opposite of this site. Can anyone guess can anyone read my mind this Monday morning for a site that is the exact opposite of this? Not a car dealership. Google would be a good example. That wasn't the one I was thinking of, but that's just as good. All right? Because let's look at Google. The opposite, right? Exact opposite of this. There's hardly anything on this page. All right? There's just a text box for you to do the search. There's a couple other links. In some cases, there's a little doodle here if there is some special occasion or something. The other one I was thinking of is Apple's website. I don't know why we are beeping like that. That's really irritating. Oh, okay. Maybe the next class is IVDL. Notice this. How many products does Ling have on his site, on his page, home page? About 1 billion. All right. How many does Apple have on their page? 1 or 2, or well, a couple of them. All right, but less than 10. All right. And those are current and all that, and plenty of space around it. All right. They're not crammed together edge to edge, and so on. All right. We'll continue this discussion next time, and we will get into the process that we're going to go through to create a well-designed website.